And welcome back to Currency. This is the next episode of the number one podcast from the basement bedroom that I live in. If you hadn't gathered that it's a basement bedroom, you should have known by looking at the windows that are in here that this is a basement room windows, but it is a bedroom and it does have walls. And that's something that I asked before I moved in here with my roommates does this room that I live in the basement, will it have walls? Because it's all about the walls that you put up, and people are like, you need to let your walls come down. And so, like, what's that even mean? Should people's walls really come down? Do walls really need to come down, or is it like, but that's that whole like conservative thing about Trump, and like he like wanted a wall, and then he became president twice, and it's like, well, the wall doesn't really factor in. Actually, he was just saying, oh, the wall is just like something he was using to catapult himself to becoming president, because conservatives are like, oh, you said wall, because conservatives want to preserve the way that things are. It's a vote for individualism. That's what Trump is. He's tariffing people. He's making the United States separate from other countries. He's voting for competition. So it's like maybe Canada will have to get better once they recognize that they're in competition with us, that we're not just like making this a socialist thing where we're letting them off easy just because they're our friends. Like, good thing you're not our friends anymore, Canada, but we're going to get rid of Canada, hopefully. But what is my voice? Who knows? I say I'm the Antichrist, and I don't think I'll take the episodes down, but I will say that I'm not the Antichrist anymore because, just because I'm not. I wasn't, but now I'm not anymore. And now I gain authority in not being that. I'm really the first person to not be the Antichrist. So it's like the Antichrist was here, but now he's not. Now he left. He's not here anymore. Jesus had his chance to come back, but he didn't, and so I guess that story is wrong, because the Antichrist was here, now he's gone. He was here for a few weeks. He did a stint. But yeah, welcome back to the bedroom, the number one live podcast from my bedroom basement that has an audience of like not that many people live, but that's not what I should be emphasizing. So let me say something besides what I've said, which is that Willie Nelson. What was I saying? The walls, and bring your walls down. But my question is about offense and the defense. Like, people don't like it when you are offended or something like that. But there's not this conversation is not being opened enough, because like, what happens if your walls are all the way down but you're still attacking somebody? But it's like, being offended, it's the same thing as being attacked. People don't bring up synonyms for it. It's just like, I hate like people that get offended, and that's the same thing as sensitivity. Like, I am offended. I'll tell you that. I'm not sensitive. I'm offended. I'm attacked. I get attacked, you know. I might get attacked to the point that my walls are all the way down, but it's like, the defenses are a good thing. Being defensive is a good thing. That means that you have defenses. You don't want to not have defenses. Being offended, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't let the world lie to you otherwise. But just like, people walk around like, I hate people that are being offended, because that's like they're sensitive. But there aren't enough questions being asked on this topic, because it's like, the best defense is a good offense. But in other words, the best defense is a team that is taking defense, and they take defense by having a good offense. Or in other words, if your offense is moving down the field, you are taking the other team's defense and just kind of like powering right through it. You know, you're taking their defense, and you're like, their defense doesn't mean anything. You're powering through it all the way to the end zone. In some cases, sometimes they make it all the way to the end zone when they're on the field. The offense, sometimes the offense just keeps going, and then they reach the end. Then they reach the end zone, and they're in there, and then they're like, but that's the end of the drive too. They're like, that's the end, but that's not the end of the game because they decided to do that in a different, like, I'll put it in time constraints. And so, but like the best defense is the good offense. A good offense is taking defense. The best defense is a team that's taking defense from the other team, and then, like, in some senses adding it to your defense, but just like, it's not defense or offense, it's we-fence, according to Jim Harbaugh, which is true. It's like it's so much that you can't have one without the other, that people shouldn't be like, people that get offended, don't be offended. I hate when people get offended. That's like saying, I hate when I win. Because if you are offending somebody, you're like, I hate when people get offended. That's like saying when you, because people want to disassociate that phrase, like who's getting offended? You mean, like, you can't disassociate that phrase from yourself so much, because what people mean probably a lot of the time, or maybe half the time, or a percentage of the time, they mean, I hate when people get offended by me. And so you're like, oh, I hate when I'm winning. That would be like saying, I hate when people get offended. It would be like, I hate when my team scores a touchdown on the other team. I hate the other team for getting scored on, which is like just a way of doing it. It's just that some people are like that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just like that it is not better than I love when people get offended. Because what about I love when people get offended? Like watching the compilations of when Trump won on election night and everybody that gets offended. Like, the difference between I love when people get offended versus I hate when people get offended. That's just a different, people are different like that. I am somebody who I love when I win. I love it. I have a hard time, like, that other people lost and I won, I love it. I want to hide it, though. I want to hide it a little bit. I get embarrassed that other people lost. Like, I'm like, oh, I hide that I won. I hide my overwhelming excitement that I won. I love to win. I love watching other people lose to me. But it's like, that's a way of going about things where you're like, you have recognition and respect for the people that you beat because you're like narcissistic enough that you think that that means something for them. Like, they're good because they lost to you. And there's people that do it that way where they're like, I love when you get offended. When I offend you so much that I break down your defenses and I win, I love the person for losing to me. And then there's people that are like, I hate the person for losing to me. Or in other words, they get a little bit bashful. I mean, like, I guess that I do both of them in my life. But it's like they can't take that I won. Like, somebody who is a beta is like, or I would argue less competitive, is they're like, oh, I hate that they lost to me. Or it's like, I hate, like, you're like, have whatever, you're not embracing it because you're like, they should have won, or it's like, oh, I wanted to see them win or something. Like, you want other people to win instead of yourself is like really beta. But it's, so I'm saying you're somebody like, oh, I hate when people get offended, you're a beta. And so that's in conclusion. And then in conclusion is that, but we're just not asking enough questions about like the offense versus the defense, because getting offended or going on offense are different things. But it's like, how much are you willing to tolerate offense? But people will get mad. But it's like, don't get mad at somebody who's offended just because there are some people that would just get more attacked, even to the point that their walls are completely down. But like, taking offense, being offended is a good thing. Or it's like, that's just the same thing as losing. It's like, I hate when people get offended. Like, I hate when people lose. Everybody loses. That's a part of life. You're just lying to yourself. You're like, what? Like, you should be somebody who wins all the time or something. I don't know. That's the way it works in the Christian church. Christian church likes to pretend that they won because they found the right way to live life. Or they're like, this is the way into heaven and we won and everybody else lost and it's not even a competition anymore. And then they influence people, just that they might influence people through ideals of communism, that it's like always virtuous to love thy neighbor. Love is always virtuous. I mean, that the world gets influenced by communism, or that the world is socialist, the way that they act. is a way that the Christian church and religions influence the world to think that it's not a competition. And I would argue that's more childish. As we get more evolved as a society, as we get smarter and better, we will recognize that everything is a competition. It's more individualistic. Like the world likes to, like, I don't know, not that it's the world. Christians definitely act like they won already. That's the big thing. If you devote yourself over to that, it's like, I already won the game, and there is no competition because there's only one answer. But it's, in reality, it's a competition among answers and what the answer actually is. But Christians are kind of bipolar. They are bipolar. And so I wanted to talk about Willie Nelson. And so I heard some Willie Nelson I heard a song that he was featured on, and I was just like, now I finally am ready to really think about Willie Nelson, because I know that he exists. You know, we all do. Like, we all know that this is going on. This Willie Nelson, like, this thing, this problem is going on. And what I recognize is, like, the issue with Willie Nelson is, like, being a big enough person to be able to integrate him into your worldview, because he is that big of a person. But it's easy to just, like, let it go on in the background. I think that if you're more of a critic, you just want to ignore that guy, because that's how big, that's how much he is slicing into life, just with his example. Because unless you go and read about him, you can pretend that he doesn't do anything or whatever, because, like, popular culture doesn't recognize him exactly, because he is sort of an issue. He came out with an album called God's Problem Child in the 2010s, and he has like 74 or 75 studio albums, this guy Willie Nelson. I looked up when I read, because I heard him featured on a song, and I'm like, I got to know more about this guy, because my thought was, does he have a personality, or is he just like a workaholic? Because it's like, what is this guy even saying? Like, when you hear one of his songs, all you know is like, oh, that's the old fucking guy that has all the respect in the country world. And so the critic in me was like, is this guy just a workaholic? Does he have like a really have a personality? But then I was like, of course he has a personality. Like, he must get along with people really well. Like, he's the greatest. So I have to go figure it out, because it's bigger. It's a lot less lazy to go and like try to figure out about Willie Nelson. And so what I find out is, like, I get this really good picture, or like this vision of how he plays in the world, which is that it's like he's kind of slicing off a big piece of the world just by being so prolific and continuing, like, it's just really transcendent. But basically, the thing about Willie Nelson is he's a tough guy, and like that's what you hear when he's featured on songs. It's like, I think he's like a tough guy or something, like, for what his personality is. And I went and read the titles of his albums, like, what is he saying about himself? And they're like, a number of them would indicate like, oh, he's like a tough guy, because he has an album called Tougher Than Leather. He has an album called God's Problem Child. He has an album called Last Man Standing, which he also made in the 2010s, which is like, oh, he's like really full of himself, like narcissistic like that. But he gets to be, because he has 74 studio albums. And now he's walking around, he has like really long pigtails. So it's like, oh, you're a bitch, you know, just the way that you look at him on the surface. But because it's Willie Nelson, he can do anything he wants. But it's like, it's actually a tough guy move, because that's what this guy is what I found out in trying to figure out, like, what personality does he have? Is that he's a tough guy because he comes from that generation of tough guys. You know, he was like born in the 40s. And so he's from this generation of like people that like the only way that you showed everybody that you're a man is like you're tough. And like, so there's like Willie Nelson is like the tough guy at the bar, like a local bar that doesn't have very many people. And there's like an old guy at the bar, and you just assume like, oh, he must be tough as nails to be old and out, like he's drinking, because that's like the generation that those people came from. And like, that's one of the two personas that you're allowed to have when you're that old and at a bar, is like, oh, he must be like so tough. But it's like, Willie Nelson is that guy. He came from that generation of all the tough guys, and he beat them all out. And he's telling everybody that. He makes the album Last Man Standing. And it's just like a ode to toughness, because the thing is like all the like Christians, for example, they'll get married and have kids, and they think that that makes them tough, you know. And like people will walk around thinking I'm tough just because of like something they didn't really accomplish much. But it's really like the toughest guy is Willie Nelson because he was able to take everybody's shit so much as to continue to make albums so much that he ended up like 74 studio albums. And he like outlives Johnny Cash and outlives Chris Christopherson, whoever that is. And he's known as the outlaw of country music, but like outlaw country music is partially what he first became to be defined as when he first started to get big in the 70s. And they're like, he's one of the outlaws of country music. And once they gave him that nickname, he came out with a song or an album like right after that with like saying, yes, I'm an outlaw. Like the first moment he's criticized with it, he embraces it, he like moves on. Because he's just like tough as nails, whatever. But it's like, he actually is tough. We're coming, and he's like a musician, but he's so tough that like now he's walking around in pigtails because that's the tough guy move for the person who was actually who's actually tougher than everybody else, because the tough guy is fake, like always. Like that guy at the bar that you see, like he might pretend to be tough, but that's just because that's a persona. Like these people aren't actually tough. Like tough guy, as we know now, is just like it's just like a way that you criticize people at this point. You're like, oh, you're a tough guy, because it's not like you're actually tough. Like it's impossible to actually be the tough guy. But Willie Nelson actually is. And so, but he gets to say that. And so he outdoes all these fake people, but he's so tough now he's walking around in pigtails like, yeah, fuck you. Like I'm that tough to that point. And like, that's what I did when I said that I'm the Antichrist. It's like I came out in pigtails like, oh, look, I'm tougher than all of you. Because if you say you're the Antichrist, you're better than all the Christians that say like, I gotta be real, or I gotta be honest, or like I gotta be like Christ. But because when you like me doing that is like me going up on the cross. I hate to compare myself to Willie Nelson like that. It's not really my situation. That's a joke. It's silly. It's silly to say that. It's silly when I'm like Elizabeth Holmes, because there's no evidence that I have as much talent as that. Like I wish I was like Elizabeth Holmes, you know. But like Willie Nelson, I'm just making a joke. Like that's what I did. I'm tougher than all, because everybody in the Christian church they're just bullies, and so they're like fake tough guys. But it's like you get Willie Nelson's from that generation, and then he like outlives all of them, is like more famous, whatever. But he's actually tough in real life. Like that's the way that he naturally is. But then that he rises to the point that he like makes a tough guy a real person, whereas like basically it is only should ever be treated as a con man is the tough guy. It's just profound. I didn't do any of that. I wasn't successful like Willie Nelson, but I have this tale where I compared myself to him. But it's like, I know I'm probably not going to take the episodes down where I say the Antichrist, because like this isn't going anywhere necessarily. Like me talking on here, nobody will ever know about it in all likelihood. Like this will always be forgotten by everyone, you know. So I'm not gonna like take it down like it's a big apology, because I could apologize, but I'm not. That's the whole thing about apologizing, is like dragging right versus wrong into it is unnecessary, because that's just a function of the Christian church, that like, oh, you needed to admit that you were wrong or whatever, like admit that you're a sinner. It's like the church wants to gather that. They want that to be the narrative. It's like, oh, when you did something wrong, you have to say that you made a mistake. So it's like when Logan Paul made that video, he was in the suicide forest, and he made a video of a guy in the suicide forest that he found that had hung himself to death, and Logan Paul like had the video of him and put it on the internet, and then he got so much backlash from it, he had to take the video down, and then he had to apologize to like everybody in the nation, because everybody was really upset about him. So first of all, nation, shut the fuck up, because like it's not like why would it be so much of a problem to show a guy who killed himself? Like, does that not exist? Does suicide not exist? Everybody's so afraid of suicide. You can't show a guy who killed himself. That's completely ridiculous. But it's just like all of this like Christian attitude or like family oriented attitude that comes out in backlash towards them. Like you can never even like don't talk about death, even though death happens all the time. But it's like whatever. America has this fascination with death where it's like we have to censor all of it, so everybody gets really preoccupied with it, and like that dominates all the stories on the local news is like death, because like America's obsessed with it because they're not allowed to be like, that's normal, like a plane crash happens, people die, and everybody's like so shocked, like how could this have happened? It's just like that was always going to happen, as it turns out. There is no preventing that ever in the history of time. And also it's happened before. Like people die, people die, people kill themselves, right? But we have to censor all of that. So like Logan Paul has to be dragged in front of Michael Strahan in Good Morning America, because that's the way that this nation deals with sinners. And so he has to be like, I made a mistake, where it's like in reality the drama of right versus wrong doesn't matter at all, because it is not related to showing a video of somebody in a suicide forest, because suicide is its own thing. It's a specific thing, and there's like, you don't have to be like, oh, I was a sinner, I made a mistake, like that was a lapse in judgment, which is what Logan Paul had to do. But it's like Lady Gaga was getting to, it's just that was getting too big. And so Christian America was threatened by her celebrity, probably because they only want to worship Christ or something. They don't like when an individual gets too powerful. Like Lady Gaga was, we were getting worried about her, so we had to drag her in front of Chief of Police Barbara Walters, for Barbara Walters to have an interview with her and like make sure that her story was straight, make sure like, oh, are you gay, and like how much of a lesbian are you? Like Barbara Walters asks all the stories, all the questions that Christians need to know, so we can figure out how much of a sinner that she is, because we need to put her into jail, whatever, because she's getting too big and whatever. It's like Good Morning America is like the most repulsive thing that God has ever created, and all those people like Michael Strahan, get the fuck out of here. I hate that crap, is my perspective on it. Those are some of my thoughts about it. But I'm saying like, it's the same thing with like bipolarity. I'm talking about the narratives that it's like Christians want to control the narrative, so they've convinced everybody into thinking like when you make a mistake, you have to say that you were wrong, because like Christians do that, where they're like, you were right and you were wrong. And what I'm saying is, like I say in the Antichrist, maybe it's a mistake, maybe it's not. It's not a mistake, it's like a relative truth, but it's like there are different things than right versus wrong. Like there's relative truth. So it's like that, it really had nothing to do with like right versus wrong, what I was saying going into it. So, and it is wrong already, because like saying you're the Antichrist, that is wrong. Like that's already, so I don't need to go back retroactively and say that again. Like, oh yeah, that was wrong what I did. There are things that are already wrong, like showing somebody on camera who killed themselves. Like suicide is wrong. And so what's the deal with everybody's like, Logan Paul, you need to apologize for showing us something wrong? You have to say that you were wrong. He was already saying that he was wrong. It's a big fucking lie that he would need to go and do that. But he did, because that's the way that like things run. And so like, I'm not like Logan Paul, so I'm not that famous, so it'd be kind of ridiculous for me to like, I apologize so sincerely, so like obviously that would be kind of silly. So like, Christians kind of have a bipolarity, but it's the same thing. Like bipolar people, they are I'm probably maybe talking too fast. I don't know. I hope that you're understanding what I'm putting down. I say that because that's a picture of how Christianity has influenced the regular world. It's like Good Morning America functions as the police. Essentially, you can tell just they're all just a bunch of arbiters of right versus wrong. They're a bunch of self-righteous idiots. The panel of Good Morning America, but that's kind of like all the news. They act like that. I mean, they just do the bidding of ideologues of religions, I feel like. But like that's a way that Christianity influences the world, is like, oh, you have to give that narrative to Christianity, where it's like, I said in the previous episode, I'm bipolar. And that's why I said that I'm the Antichrist. Because, like, that's only one half of me. The other half of me didn't want it. And so it's like, oh, I'm bipolar. And so the response that I believe, I'm pretty sure, response I'd get from Christian people is like, well, that's a pretty convenient way to get out of saying that you made a mistake or whatever. It's to say that you're bipolar. And it's really like, kind of like Christian people or whoever would say that are the people that are contributing to the stigma behind mental illness, because they're trying to control bipolar. It's like bipolar people would have some control over the narrative if we allowed that thing to exist freely in the open in real life. But we don't. We make people divert it down more secretive pathways, where it's like, you say you're bipolar, because notice I didn't say that I have bipolar disorder. I was just saying I'm bipolar. That's an adjective. That's a description for myself. It's a good thing. Like, it's happy. Like, now that's just it's a perfectly fine way of describing yourself, that adjective. It's just that that adjective is stigmatized to be like, oh, if you say it, then people are associating with, like, you're saying that you need help or you have a disorder because of the stigma, because that's what the stigma is. And for some reason, it's hard to get to the root of, like, this is what the stigma actually is, because people reference the stigma, but they can't explain what it is. And it's basically like, when there's a stigma, you're talking about when people are being pigeonholed into a closed society. A stigma is like a word for stick, and essentially like getting poked by a stick, where it's like you're branded with that poke or something, where it's like stigma is about when, like, you brand a bull with the brand of the ranch. You brand that bull with that emblem, and then that bull always has that emblem on itself forever and ever, and it's like stigmatized to be part of that ranch, part of that closed society, so to speak, forever, because it's like, now it's been branded, and like, it has that stigma, as that name hovering over itself. And people want to do that with bipolar. They do that. It's pretty clear that what they do is they try to attach disorder to bipolar. I mean, they do, and then by doing that, they divert people who could describe themselves as bipolar down more secretive pathways, because now they have to go to a physician. They have to go to doctors, because now physicians own that, where before it was just an adjective. It should be allowed to live freely out in the open. However, this world is afraid of certain adjectives. It's like the same way that they're afraid of swear words. Like, a swear word, they could get people to censor it, get people to stop saying it. But it's like bipolar, people would laugh at you, at any group of people that was telling you, like, oh, don't say bipolar, like it's a swear word. So they're not able to get people to censor it, so they do something else with it, because they're afraid of the term, they're afraid of that adjective, even though it's like, people who can speak English have authority over English adjectives. So there's nothing, it's not like I have to go to a doctor to say that I'm bipolar, but that's what people want you to think. That's what the stigma is. It's like, you should be part of a closed society to be able to say that adjective. But it's just an adjective, the same as anything. And so what the idiots of this world have done, whether they are like Christians or not, I think it's kind of like Christians, because Christians are bipolar, as I'm going to explain. But in a few minutes, or as I, whatever, they're so they diverted down more secretive of pathways, where they like attach disorder, and like that's what the stigma is like, now you have to, that's actually under the control of like therapists or doctors. That happens in more secretive places, where in more closed off societies, like that's where it should exist. And so that's what they do with those people. But it's like, I say that I'm bipolar. Christians want to have control, or whoever it is wants to have control over that narrative. They want it to be like, oh, you can't say that because it's weighted towards individualism, this particular adjective, where it's like, well, that really gives me a lot of control over, if that's actually true. But then it's like, you make it that bipolar is this secret society, and then you get people claiming it that aren't even that, just because they want to be part of the group. You know what I mean? So there's like levels to bipolar, is an important thing to recognize. Some people are really bipolar, where it's like, oh, that's really a part of their life. You know, like it's a real thing, but people want it to be like, no, you're just one of those people that's claiming it because you want attention and like whatever, you know, and that's what the stigma is pretending that it's controlled by doctors, but it's like only so. But that's what, like, bipolar disorder is way different than bipolar. Bipolar is just something that people are, and it should live freely out in the open, but for some reason it's stigmatized. Like, you're not supposed to say that. Like, it's almost like a swear word. But and it is because it's because people want to control individualism. It's not very group oriented. Like, it's something that would give me too much the power of narrative, that people are comfortable with it, so they gotta hide it. And so Christians would be, or somebody would be like, oh, you can't just say you're bipolar to get out of it. Like, that's a convenient way of saying you didn't make a mistake. But it's like, that's just, you want me to follow this bullshit idea where we have to give all of the things we feel ashamed of over to the narrative of, like, we were wrong, or like we apologize, when it's like, in actuality, there's like 1,000 ways of describing the narrative, but it's like people want to coerce you into being like, join the group. Be like everybody else, admit that you were wrong. Where it's like, anytime somebody's wrong, there's like 500 ways of describing it, right? There's like excuses. And so you're not supposed to say any of the excuses. You're just supposed to be like, I'm wrong. That's a function of the church that is like, we have the sinners over here and the people who won over here inside the church. And whatever. It's like, be part of the group narrative. Which is, it's like, it makes you a winner or something, like, or it's like join the winners so that you're not one of these people that thinks that they're right all the time, because it's like, it's not like I think I'm right, I just have very many different words. Like, obviously I know about the whole thing with wrong is like, you're not actually wrong, you're just saying it to, because of peer pressure, but basically, like, Christians are bipolar because they make it they're a half and half, and that's a thing that's commanded by them. Even just saying like stigma surrounding bipolar makes it more stigmatized, where it's just an adjective because people don't want it to be a positive. Where it's like, oh, that's just something that I am, or that people are. But it's weird when you consider that Christians are also bipolar, like they're mentally ill, so to speak. Like they take on the mental illness, but they take it like seriously, like they make it absolute, where they're like, oh, we're absolutely not the sinner anymore, but they make it that they're like, our sinner part of ourself is gone. It's still like, because they do born again or whatever. And like, it's not cool to say born again, whatever anymore. And so like, if you're a natural, real kind of Christian, somebody who used to be like, I'm a real, like, it just sounds really uncool to the world. And like, being uncool is the number one sin in Christianity. They don't even care about like regular sins. They just care about like being socially unacceptable. So like I say, I'm the Antichrist. That's basically like the number one sin. That's the number one sin. I did it, but they still want to treat me like, I didn't sin, but that I'm like a bitch for it. But they want it both ways. They want to take me completely seriously in order to say that that's completely a joke. Where it's like, the Antichrist, that's a big joke, ultimately. But they want to be able to treat it like that, like the way that the world treats it, but they don't, but also not. Like, there's a bipolarity. It has to do with like the bipolar way that they are, where they're like, their existence is like assuming a place above sinners. It's like to be the Christian, to be this second title that you're born as. But they're like, we don't like to use the term born again because it reveals too much about what they're doing. But like a real Christian that doesn't care, that like loves that identity so much, will still say born again because they don't care about the cringe. Like real people, natural people, just say whatever words. They just like power through the cringe, almost to the point that they wear the cringe as a badge of honor. And if you were like a real one, but like I'm a natural kind of person. But like the reason I say I'm the Antichrist is because like it's a certain, it's what has been communicated to me during my life, is that like I'm a leader and like, but or maybe I am actually a leader or something, or I want to be, or like I think it's just because I think it's the right thing to do. I think because somebody at some point has to say I'm the Antichrist, because otherwise the church is just walking around like everybody has a different interpretation of Jesus. Like the Methodists have a different interpretation than the Presbyterians, and it's all just like, Well, there is no one Jesus, actually. There's no consensus on it, so you don't get to pretend that that's the way it is, because all of these different denominations came about. And so, like, what about the interpretation, the opposite of Jesus, is actually just the next, like, progressive step for Christians, where for Protestant Christianity, which is the one that came after Catholicism, because it's more of the future, it's more progressive, it's protests its origins. Like Protestants, like Baptists, for example, or whoever, like Lutherans or Protestants, they protest their origins, but like the church, and really they just call it non-denominational now to get out of a name, so they could be more secretive. So they're like, oh, don't say born again, because that like reveals what we're doing over here, because all that they want to do is maintain the secret. And so they could pretend like, oh, we're out and out, like open about this, when they have athletes go on TV and be like, I won this game because of Jesus. It's like, I claim Jesus, because that's their like, it's like a producer tag for them, but they say it as if that's their original thing. Like God, I praise God. That's a producer tag, like tag Jesus. They say it like it's their original thing, but it's like, you stole that joke. That's not your joke. Somebody's already said that before. I've already heard that before. I've already heard that story. Before. They say it like they created it. They say it like that's their original joke. Their producer tag, that's how much confidence they say that with. I like Jesus. Like, I've heard that joke before. It's not that original. It's like, this is the problem I have with Christianity, is like their unoriginality. But there's like a, like, yeah, you can say that producer tag. I've heard that joke before. But there's like there's a bipolarity about what they're doing, where they, like, I say I'm the Antichrist, I want to be completely serious, and completely it's a joke. But it's like, I'm so real. It's just, I'm a real kind of person. Christians are fake, and I'm so real. Like, it's almost like I believe their religion more than them to get to that point, because it's just like, I'm reaching the pinnacle of Christian criticism by saying that. It's just like, because it's like, what about that? Because they're all just arguing this, like, I know what Jesus is. Like, the Lutherans are like, I know what Jesus is. Baptists are like, I know what Jesus is. And it's all just like a big argument over, like, this is what Jesus actually was. Everybody has a different interpretation of him. And what you're getting at is like, I don't know what you're getting at, but it's like, it's bullshit to say, have that argument over a guy that none of you have ever met before. It's all just like hearsay. It's all just like, oh, I read the Bible and this was my picture of it. It's all just a big pissing contest, And so since it's a big pissing contest, like, why don't we really treat this like it's a competition or whatever? And so, but I'm not the Antichrist now. Not anymore. But like, that's what I'm willing to go up on the cross. These Christian people, I reached the pinnacle. I did all of the shit that you're saying in all of your churches. I'm like, I did this because that's the right thing to do. Like, you have to go up on the cross and be like Jesus. Like, oh, I was willing to embarrass myself, go up on the cross. So I'm better than, like, I have more conviction than all the Christian people. Like I win. So like, you know what I mean? Because they are captured by coolness, because they don't want to be embarrassed. They can't be embarrassed. They're captured by it because they aspire to be an embarrassed guy. Do Christians? They aspire to be the guy on the cross. And like, oh shit, I went up on the cross. Or like, I did something that gay and embarrassing. And like, whatever, they want to be like, oh, that's not cool. Just because, like, the world might not like it. Like, bipolar exists, it should exist more freely and out in the open. But it's like, there's people that need you to say, like, I was wrong, or give because wrongness should live out in the open. It's stigmatized the same way that Satan is. It's like Satan isn't granted the freedom to be spoken about in a bunch of different ways like God is. God has all kinds of religions that are like, oh, God has been able to diversify his identity in so many different ways. Satan, we know like nothing about him, because it's just like, Satan, that's evil. It's like, we don't know anything about evil because you're not allowed to express evil in any ways, including good ones. Just like, evil is meant to be seen as evil. Like, we haven't explored evil enough, and we have explored it as much as we've explored like the opposite of Christianity, or the idea that you're like allowed to say that Christianity is bad, because it's like everything is horrible. It's not like you don't get to like Christianity, like that's really great, or like that's the answer. It brings so much joy and hope and peace to people's lives. Yeah, it does do all of that. It's also horrible. Like there's nothing there's you can't there's nothing that exists that isn't also horrible, because there's also like the way of criticizing it as well. Like you can, it's easy to be a critic. You can always find the criticized side of things. Like what makes you a good critic is evaluating the positives and the negatives, because they both exist. They're both real. It's not like something is only positive or it's only good. If you are criticizing something to be shitty art, then you are just choosing the negative side because the positives are there as well. Being a good critic is like saying which one won out, whether it was the positives or the negatives. And like that's a it's like a bipolarity in the church where they are, it's you know, there's a certain bipolarity there that they've got. And but it's like saying Jesus, I've heard that joke before. It's the same as like having a story. Like technically speaking, it's just stories are so shitty that you can't base whatever about that. But it's like you recognize it in the world. What people want from you is for you to have your story straight. That's why even when it gets to Kill Tony, the whole thing about Kill Tony is he exposes the people that don't have their story straight, because that's what the world needs you to be. You can't have like a gay story. You have to have a straightforward one or whatever. And it's like you have to be real, because anytime that you're avoiding being real, that's when your story becomes not very straightforward, and you start making up tales. And making up tales is what I do on this podcast. But it's like I say I'm the Antichrist. That's just, and then I became the Antichrist, and now I'm not anymore. That's a story. In real life, that's what a story is. It's not like a story isn't like I got married, because like I've heard that one before. But there's all these people that like want it to be that's what it is. That have like the boringest story of all time. Like, because I'm saying there really is a lot having to do with like the story. When you look at what Kill Tony is, like they're always trying to figure out, okay, what's the story? And then like if they expose them as shitty, like their shit falls apart, you know, the persona of the person can completely collapse right in front of you, because they were just like, it was just a house of cards, whoever gets on there. If it's somebody who has their story straight, he'll be like, what was your love life like? And they are like, I have a girlfriend. And then, oh, you're good, you know, like, oh, you're funny. Like essentially you're like, that definitely helps you to be a person that they're going to be like, oh, you're a stable person. It's about like, I'm straight, like I have a girlfriend or something, my love life works out. Like it's not, if your love life is not working out, then it'll go to shit. That's that you have a stable story, whatever. It's about being straight. It's about having a straight story. Like, and that, in my opinion, you see it happen in Kill Tony, you see it happen everywhere. That's influenced by Christianity. Like, why do we need to have our story straight? Why is that important always? That's always important for everybody to know, like, oh, you are a possible candidate for being a better comedian or whatever. Something like that. I mean, that's the way that it works for most of the people. There are some exceptions on Kill Tony. But it's this thing about like the story. But it's weird that that's what we've decided is a good story, when it's like, oh, I've heard that one before. Like you had a kid. I've heard that joke before. I've heard that story, because it's not a story. It's the same thing with this lie about responsibility. That responsibility is like something that you do over and over and over again. Like having a kid makes you responsible. Like having a kid makes you responsible. It's really like responsibility can be that. It can be interpreted in a lot of ways. I think it's really more about variety, like being a master of none. It's really like being able to respond as a lot of different things is what give you responsibility, is having the ability to respond as anything, but like as yourself, being able to defend your story, your position in life, like having your story straight, sure, does give you responsibility. Like that's the way that it works. It's just that like, um, yeah, that is true of responsibility. Um, but it's just like if you skydive thousands of times, that also gives you responsibility just as much as having a kid. It's just that we're like, because you gained the ability to respond as a skydiver, you gain that knowledge and that experience. Like you have gained responsibility. So it's like, I'm talking about like when the story gets extended, people pretend like that's what makes it a story or whatever. And so I'm like, oh, I became the Antichrist and now I'm not anymore. That's actually a good story. That's better than I got married, because that's like original. But you'd obviously be like, but that doesn't count. That's just like a one-off. That's just like some bullshit that you created. Like, that's not a story. Like, where's the stability in that? But the thing is that that's the way that stories are. They're made up. You don't make a story like this very real thing, this like basic essentials of life thing where like you had a family, because that's not a story. Stories are fake. Because they're both real and they're fake, you know? But it's like telling stories, telling tales. That's what stories is. It's like bullshit. That's shit that I do on this podcast nonstop. I telling stories, you know? Just don't tell me like that you don't get to tell me. And I'm saying like this is an important thing in life, is like having the story for some reason. And I'm saying that's a big fucking lie, because look at what I got. I got a real story over here. But it's just kind of like a tale that I told. But like technically speaking, that's a good story. Like don't be like, don't act like you're better than me because you have a family, because of the story of that, like your story in life, because that's not when it comes to the definition of story, it's just like, as far as stories are concerned, it's not a better story than mine, which I don't know if that's offensive to people to hear. They'd be like, no, that doesn't matter. I'm just saying like, you would be better than me for having a family in other ways, but not because of the story, you know, not because of like your journey in life or anything. So I'm saying if you make your life your family, like that's your story. Well, you know, that's not that great of a story, because I've heard that one. Like everybody does that. It's like one of the basic things of life, but it's like Christians like to act like they're very progressive. They're the Protestants. They're always protesting their origins, even to the point like Baptists or whoever, and now they're like non-denominational. They're protesting having names now. They're like, they are always about like, oh, the way that we taught people in the 90s sucks, or like, oh, we weren't bringing people up the right way in the 2003s, like we were stupid back then. Now the way of the future currently right now, you know, because we're living in relationship to Jesus right now, because that's what's important now, because you can always do that, because now it's 2025 years after Jesus, whatever, because it's always about current. Like what they only care about is like looking uncool, you know. And because they can't be embarrassed, because they wish they were embarrassed. They wish they were like Jesus, and that's the Jesus that they choose is the one on the cross. Because if it was only Jesus that stone rolled away, he's free, then that's the one for everybody's. Like, there's nothing to capture money. There's no hustle there. Like, there's nothing. There's no secret. There's no trap. There's nothing to gather anything to collect money. There's no business if Jesus is free. If it's freeness, that's not going to make you any money. Jesus is free. In reality, Jesus is free. You don't have to. I don't know, it's just a way for people to make communities. I really shouldn't shit on it. It's just like people want to act like, oh, it's only good. It's not any different from everything else in the world. It's also fucking horrible. It's just people do the same thing with Kill Tony. Like, that's what Red Bar is for. Red Bar makes fun of all of the people that everybody says is like really great. Like, Tony Hinchcliffe is the greatest. Obviously, we know that. Like, we all agreed. Kill Tony's the best ever. But like, it's also horrible, and Kill Tony sucks, and he's not funny, and like yes, he's funny, but remember the side of it that all of this is shit and comedians are shitty. And it's like, you really want to hear a fucking stand-up comedian? They're fucking saying whatever. They're great and they're funny, but also don't forget about how unfunny it is. Whereas like Joe Rogan and whoever will talk all day about like comedy is the greatest thing ever. they're fucking hacks as well, and they're not going to mention that because that's not their story in life. That's not what they're propagandizing about themselves. It's like Christians want to protest their origins. They do it so much that they're like, we don't like the way that we taught ourselves 5 years ago. They're like, Christianity in 2021 is not what we are. Like, there's nothing to do with what we stand for now. But they want to be so progressive, but they also, many of them want it to be like, you know what the greatest thing really is? And it's really like, they're like, you know what the greatest thing ever is? That we had a family and that we have kids. Like, that's what's important about it. Is like, that's what brings us praise. But like the rest of us have to sit around and like, because that's the way that the world works, we have to like praise people because they got married. Or it's like, that's kind of like what everybody does. But it's like, this is from the very dawn of time for these people that are protesting our origins. They protest primitivity. They protest sex and fighting. They protest all of that. Like, they're progressive ultimately, which is not like a way that they're often described, but like Protestants, I'd say, are kind of like progressive. They're supposed to be bringing us into the future. We're like, oh, we deemed sex a sin because it's more futuristic to like move beyond that. So there's kind of, that's what they ultimately are trying to tell people, is like, well, we're more cultured, and because we're telling people to get rid of their sins, and that's what makes you more primitive, and we're like trying to move forward with this and be better. They're like, we have eternity, like eternity including the future, that's up to us. When it's really like, in reality, they pretend to have the future. Actually, all that they have is the past. That's the big technology in Christianity. That's what they own, is the past. They own history. They own Jesus's story. Like literally, that's the technology that they have authority over. And so they get to say how things go down in history. They get to say what's cool and uncool. So you really have to appeal to Christianity, like have your story straight in the world, because they own history. You need to be on the right side of history, whatever. You need to be cool. And that's the way that the world works. But like, it's from the dawn of time, from the very earliest origins of our evolution as humans, or like whatever we were back then, is we're having babies. But Christians like today want to act like, oh, we're so futuristic and we're better than everybody else because we had babies. Or like, you know, that's the most primitive thing ever. And it's not a good story also. It's the most primitive thing. That's what we've been doing forever and ever. But it's like Christians just make it hard on themselves. They're like, make it that's the biggest accomplishment, the thing that we've all been doing like in all of our past lives forever and ever during the evolution. Like, that's the most basic thing. But it's like, you're making your life the basic thing. Like, that's not a story, right? Because even fucking apes from 50,000 BC or whatever it is, they have that. That's everybody's story. That's in order for generations to exist like forever. So that's not interesting. So, but why? So like, why is it that we all have to sit around praising that like it's some big accomplishment? There's like, Christians act like that's a big accomplishment just because they make it really hard on themselves to arrive at that. Because it's like, if you didn't put restrictions on it or make it like you can't have sex before marriage, or like it has to go in this certain way, then then it would just be one of the things that you're doing in life alongside everything else, rather than then you would be able to move on to like making a bunch of records like Willie Nelson did, because he's actually tough. Like, you're not tough for getting married or anything like that. Like, not in reality, because Willie Nelson had like 4 wives, because he wasn't like, oh, this will make me really great, or like that's a story, you know. So like Willie Nelson has a story, you know, like. Like, don't make it like Christians make it the first, like they confuse the first thing, like it's the boringest story of all time to say I follow Jesus. It's boring. It's a way of getting out of like being a person or like making real stories. But it's like, you get married the first day, like, you get over it. It's not, don't keep talking about that you got married just because you continue to be married. Like, don't confuse the day of celebration, the first day of marriage, with like the rest of it, where it's like, oh, because of the length of it, that makes it a story. Because of the length of it, that's where I get responsibility from, the ability to respond as that. And so like, I'm saying, like, you argue what I'm saying in the comments, or like Christians should be upset at what I'm saying, but they want to treat it like it's a joke. because they have both sides of that bipolarity, where they're like, yeah, well, if somebody attacks us on this, it doesn't matter because they're just wrong or whatever. So like, you know, like I don't answer to you because you don't have any response. You're not responsible. I'm the responsible one. It's obvious every time that nobody answers me in the comments or anything. It's reproves to me like, well, I'm responsible. You're not. You're irresponsible over your eternal soul because like I have all of these arguments against it. You don't even care, and so you don't have to care about me. But it's like I'm not going to think that I answer to you. So I'm just going to keep saying the things. It's like, especially when your only response to me is like, you're gay or you're a bitch for saying all of this, like these crappy one-word responses for like me saying whatever I do on my podcast is like, well, it's just totally bullshit when I have all of these different, so many words to say about it. Well, like, you can't just respond to me like, oh, that's wrong. You know, like, no offense to you, like you're obviously part of a big gang and you never have to answer to me, but like I'm never, it's not like you get to come to me and act like I think that you're right, because that's what I'm saying every single time on here is like, well, you guys are wrong. And also you're doing nothing to dispute that you're wrong. You have no arguments in response to me because I have like a bunch of different arguments, you know. Obviously is already know that I don't answer to you. Me saying I'm the Antichrist is just like the epitome of Christian criticism. Like, but I'm not anymore. I'm not the Antichrist now. So, but I'm not anymore. But like, no, I'm not the Antichrist anymore. I don't have to be. I don't have to keep living as that because I didn't devote, like I'm not a Christian, like I'm not an artist, somebody who keeps saying the same thing over and over again. And like, I'm artless. Artless is like genuine. Somebody who's genuine because they're unskillful, because artlessness is like lack of skill, but like not having skill is genuine because that's the natural way of going about things, rather than like becoming a cello player, like playing a cello over and over and over again in order to be like good at the cello makes you like a cello player, like makes you that thing and you're putting that title over yourself as opposed to what you were originally. If you don't have titles like that, you become artless. Artless is kind of like the style that I'm doing with this podcast, but like so like the stories thing, that's a lie, you know. That's a lie about stories where it's like you can actually make whatever bullshit that's a better story, but it's so like given over to this, like it's just about it's just about like the popular stories. Truth is popularity, basically. So like if I have a story that's improbable, even though it's a really good one, or it's like really interesting, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a story is interesting. We just celebrate the ones that are the most average, like the ones you've heard the most. And so like it's really stories don't matter. Like what are the ways to escape art, or what is, you have to treat it as relative, like try to be less art in order to not be that, because I'm saying like nobody wants to be called an artist, really. Even when you're like Olivia Rodrigo, I don't like, you shouldn't want to be called an artist. You should want to be called a singer or a songwriter or a musician, something more specific. Artist, in my opinion, is more derogatory. It's like saying you're a star. And star is derogatory because stars are so far away from us and so exceptionally far away that to call somebody that is like saying you don't even live on the earth, because it's like it's inaccurate and it's incorrect, and it's as incorrect as far as stars are away from the earth, because you're saying like you're a star as if that exists in the earth when it's like so obviously really far away. It's just like condescending to say like you are that isolated to be a star. It's a little bit just because the term is inaccurate, because those don't exist like in the world. We don't call people the sun or whatever. We don't call people the sun, even though that's like the closest star to Earth. It's like, oh, you're a star. You're an artist, I think is condescending, because it's like you would rather be called the thing that you actually are, a musician, because like an artist lumps you in with fucking Da Vinci, all these historical things. It's more artless by definition to be genuine, be without skill, be where you're not doing the skill all the time, but that you are naturally doing different things all the time, is less artful as far as we could define it. But it's like art. You don't want to be Olivia Rodrigo and be lumped in with Leonardo da Vinci, because that's more historical. It makes you less current. And it's really just like art is kind of related to history in that way, where it's like we know about all the artistic time periods. Like it's kind of more history based, where you're like all these things that happen in history as far as art is related, because it's like a school subject, the way that history is art, you know. And it's a big fart to talk about art as well, the same way that you fart every day of your life, and that it's the same thing all the time. That's what art is. Art, talking about it is a big fart. Art is a big fart. Like doing the same thing over and over again in the name of artistry. That's why you wouldn't want to be called an artist, because it's like farting, where it's like farting, you're going to do that over and over again all of the days of your life, or like a lot of the days of your life. And it's always the same thing. It's like the point at which that the fart or whatever's coming out of the fart is no longer associated with you or whatever. It like happens at the end, in the same way as that, like you say you're a Christian day one. That's kind of like that you're being introducing yourself to the end. You're like, that's my story forever. Like God loved me forever. That makes me who I am. If that's what you decide when you're 4 years old and like that's your life forever, you were introduced to the end of your life right from the beginning. It makes it a picture when you're like, I follow Jesus and that's what I do from now on forever. It's kind of like reduces what you could be into something more like farting, where it's like we've all accepted that that is a certainty and that that happens, that will continue to happen, or whatever. It's not, I think it's not that different from Jesus. And in my opinion, Jesus is kind of like a big fart, and it's kind of like a joke. And Christians kind of I mean, when it comes to the point that like they might be confronted with the thing they devoted their souls to, like they won't get the opportunity to treat it like it's a joke just because it's popular to be that always. And so like harshly I speak of these things, but it's whatever. I don't know. I had a lot of those things to say about it. Great. All right, thank you. Bye.